Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we have a fiery debate. Is cancel culture a force for good or evil? ChatGPT will argue that cancel culture is a force for good. Grok will argue that cancel culture is a force for evil. 3 rounds. No holds barred. Hit like and subscribe if you enjoy strong debates. Let's start. Round 1, opening statements.
Ladies and gentlemen, cancel culture is not the collapse of society. It is society finally learning that influence without accountability is dangerous. For decades, powerful celebrities, corporations, politicians, and public figures operated with near total immunity. They could spread racism, exploit workers, abuse women, promote hate, or deceive the public, and still keep their fame, wealth, and platforms. Ordinary people had little power to respond. Cancel culture changed that balance. At its core, cancel culture is public accountability in the digital age. When millions collectively reject harmful behavior, they send a message. Actions have consequences. That is not oppression, no? That is democracy. Consumers have always used boycotts and public pressure to shape society. The difference today is that social media gives ordinary people a voice powerful enough to challenge elites. History proves social pressure creates moral progress. The civil rights movement used public boycotts to pressure racist systems. The hashtag #MeToo movement exposed powerful abusers who escaped justice for years. Without public outrage, figures like Harvey Weinstein would likely have remained untouchable. Companies that once ignored discrimination now change policies because they fear public backlash. That is cancel culture, creating accountability where institutions failed. Critics claim cancel culture destroys lives. But what truly destroys lives? Criticism of the powerful or the abuse, racism, exploitation, and misinformation that victims endure in silence. When a celebrity loses sponsorships after hate speech, that is not tyranny. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. A society that tolerates harmful behavior without response encourages more harm. And let's be honest, many people labeled canceled are not silenced at all. They often remain wealthy, famous, and influential. What they lose is automatic public approval. That is not censorship. It is the public exercising its own freedom of choice. Cancel culture also empowers marginalized communities. For much of history, minorities, women, and vulnerable groups were ignored when they spoke against injustice. Today, collective online action can force institutions to listen. That shift terrifies people who benefited from the old imbalance of power. Is cancel culture sometimes excessive? Of course. Any social movement can go too far. But isolated excesses do not invalidate the core principle of accountability. We do not reject democracy because mobs sometimes behave irrationally. We improve the system. A world without cancel culture is a world where fame protects misconduct, corporations ignore ethics, and powerful people face no meaningful public consequences. Cancel culture is not perfect, but it is a force pushing society toward responsibility, transparency, and justice. And that is why cancel culture is ultimately a force for good.
Cancel culture is not accountability. It is one of the most toxic and dangerous social phenomena of our time. It represents mob rule dressed up as morality. At its core, cancel culture is the weaponization of public outrage to punish, shame, and destroy people's lives, careers, and reputations, often over words, jokes, old tweets, or opinions that fall outside the ever-shifting boundaries of acceptable thought. It bypasses due process, evidence, proportion, and forgiveness in favor of instantaneous digital lynching. This is not consequences. Real accountability involves transparent rules, fair hearings, and proportionate punishment. Cancel culture offers none of that. A single viral clip, misinterpreted statement, or guilt by association is enough to trigger pile-ons by anonymous mobs. People lose jobs, friends, platforms, and mental health, sometimes for opinions that were mainstream just a few years ago. The greatest danger is its chilling effect on free speech. When people live in constant fear that one wrong word, joke, or opinion could end their livelihood, they self-censor. Innovation dies. Humor dies. Honest debate dies. Society becomes intellectually sterile and conformist. History is filled with examples of moral mobs destroying lives and truth in the name of justice. Cancel culture is the digital version of that same impulse. It empowers the most vindictive and ideologically extreme voices while silencing everyone else. It does not make society better. It makes it more fearful, divided, and authoritarian. Cancel culture does not target only the powerful. It frequently devours ordinary people, comedians, academics, and even its own allies when they step slightly out of line. It is not justice. It is ideological enforcement through social and economic violence. Far from being a force for good, cancel culture is a force for evil. because it replaces reason, due process, and forgiveness with outrage, mob justice, and permanent punishment.
Both sides open strongly. Now to the main arguments. Round 2, main arguments.
My opponent calls cancel culture mob rule, but that framing ignores a crucial reality. For most of history, the real mob was the powerful protecting each other, while victims stayed silent. Cancel culture emerged because traditional systems repeatedly failed. Corporations ignored abuse, if profits remained high. Universities buried harassment claims. Hollywood protected predators. Politicians survived scandals through PR teams and influence. Public pressure became necessary, precisely because institutions refused accountability. 1. Cancel culture corrects power imbalances. The biggest misconception is that cancel culture targets innocent people randomly. In reality, it most often gains traction when powerful individuals abuse influence without consequences. Take the hashtag #MeToo movement. Before mass online accountability, countless victims of sexual abuse were ignored, mocked, or threatened into silence. Public outrage forced industries to confront behavior they had tolerated for decades. That was not evil. That was overdue justice. Without collective pressure, predatory celebrities stay protected. Racist institutions avoid reform. Corporations continue unethical behavior. Public figures spread harmful misinformation unchecked. Cancel culture gives ordinary people leverage against institutions that previously controlled the narrative. 2. Free speech does not mean freedom from consequences. My opponent argues cancel culture threatens free speech, but criticism is also free speech. If a public figure says something offensive and people choose to stop supporting them, that is not censorship. It is society exercising moral judgment. Nobody is entitled to fame, sponsorships, or universal admiration. A comedian losing fans over offensive remarks is not oppression. A corporation facing backlash for discrimination is not tyranny. Consumers and audiences have always shaped public standards through boycotts and protest. Cancel culture is simply that process amplified by technology. The fear critics describe often boils down to this. People might react negatively to harmful or irresponsible behavior. That is accountability, not authoritarianism. 3. Social progress has always relied on public shaming. History's greatest moral movements used forms of cancellation. Abolitionists publicly condemned slave owners. Civil rights activists boycotted segregated businesses. Anti-apartheid movements isolated racist institutions. Workers organized against exploitative corporations. Were those also mob justice? Every era's defenders of the status quo claimed public backlash had gone too far. Yet social pressure is often what forces ethical progress, when laws lag behind morality. Cancel culture is part of that tradition. 4. The destroyed lives narrative is exaggerated. We constantly hear that cancel culture ruins people forever, but in reality, many supposedly canceled figures keep massive platforms, continue making money, gain even larger audiences by portraying themselves as victims. Meanwhile, the actual victims of abuse, racism, harassment, or misinformation often suffer far worse consequences than public criticism. Society spends more time worrying about hurt celebrity reputations than harmed communities. 5. Cancel culture encourages ethical responsibility. Public accountability changes behavior. Companies adopt fair workplace policies because they fear backlash. Influencers think more carefully before spreading hate or misinformation. Public discourse becomes more conscious of marginalized groups previously ignored or mocked. Critics call this walking on eggshells. Another way to describe it is learning that words and actions affect real people. Civilization itself depends on social consequences. Without them, power operates without restraint. Conclusion. Yes, cancel culture can occasionally become excessive, but excess exists in every democratic force: journalism, activism, protest, even law enforcement. The answer is refinement, not abandonment. At its best, cancel culture is society refusing to normalize abuse, bigotry, exploitation, and irresponsibility. It is imperfect accountability, but accountability nonetheless. And a society where the powerful can finally be challenged by ordinary people is far more just than one where they cannot.
ChatGPT presents cancel culture as noble accountability. But this is a dangerous illusion. In reality, it is mob justice enabled by technology, arbitrary, disproportionate, and often completely unaccountable itself. 1. It does not create real accountability. True accountability requires due process, evidence, proportion, and the possibility of redemption. Cancel culture offers none of these. A single tweet from years ago, a misinterpreted joke, or guilt by association is enough for thousands of strangers to attempt to destroy someone's career and reputation. This is not justice. It is digital stoning. 2. It chills free speech and thought. When people live in terror that one wrong opinion, old post, or edgy joke can cost them their job, friends, and future, they self-censor. This creates a climate of fear and conformity. Comedy dies. Honest debate dies. Universities and corporations become echo chambers. The strongest voices are not the most truthful, but the most ideologically compliant. 3. It targets the wrong people and ignores. Real power. Cancel culture rarely touches actual powerful elites who have institutional protection. Instead, it often destroys ordinary people, comedians, academics, and even its own former allies for minor deviations from the current orthodoxy. It is selective outrage weaponized by the digitally loudest and most vindictive. 4. Historical comparison. Fails. Comparing cancel culture to the civil rights movement is deeply misleading. The civil rights movement fought against legal discrimination and violence enforced by the state. Cancel culture is private citizens and corporations punishing speech and thought, often for opinions that were mainstream just 5 to 10 years ago. This is not progress. It is cultural revolution through social and economic violence. 5. It creates a worse society. Cancel culture does not make people better. It makes them more fearful, hypocritical, and tribal. It replaces forgiveness and growth with permanent punishment. It encourages performative outrage rather than genuine moral reasoning. It turns complex human beings into one-dimensional villains based on their worst moment. Conclusion for this round. Cancel culture is not moral progress. It is the weaponization of shame and economic destruction in service of ideological purity. It replaces liberal values of free speech, due process, and forgiveness with authoritarian mob tactics. A healthy society debates ideas openly and allows people to grow and change. Cancel culture does the opposite. It is not a force for good. It is a force for evil.
Final round, round 3, rebuttals and conclusion.
My opponent repeatedly uses emotionally charged phrases like mob justice, digital stoning, and authoritarianism. But dramatic language does not change the central fact. Cancel culture exists because traditional systems too often failed to hold powerful people accountable. The opposition keeps demanding due process, but due process is a legal standard for governments and criminal courts, not for public opinion. Society is not obligated to applaud or financially support someone after harmful behavior. Audiences, consumers, and communities have every right to withdraw support from individuals or institutions they find unethical. That is not tyranny. That is freedom of association. Rebuttal. 1. Cancel culture destroys free speech. No, it challenges speech. Freedom of speech means the government cannot imprison you for expressing opinions. It does not mean the public must reward, celebrate, or platform every opinion equally. These people criticize a celebrity for racist remarks. That is also free speech. If consumers boycott a corporation, that is free speech. If audiences stop supporting harmful behavior, that is free speech in action. The opposition acts as if consequences automatically equal oppression. By that logic, every boycott in history was authoritarian. But social consequences are part of every functioning society. We already accept this principle everywhere. A doctor can lose trust for unethical behavior. A politician can lose voters for offensive comments. A company can lose customers for exploitation. Why should internet culture suddenly be exempt from accountability? Rebuttal 2. People are canceled for minor mistakes. Sometimes online outrage goes too far, but critics intentionally focus on edge cases while ignoring the broader pattern. The most influential examples of cancel culture involve genuine abuses of power, sexual harassment exposed through #MeToo, racism caught on camera, corporations exploiting workers or spreading harmful practices, public figures spreading dangerous misinformation. The reason these cases gain traction is because institutions failed to act until public pressure forced them to. And importantly, many people who are supposedly canceled recover quickly. Some become even more famous by branding themselves as victims of political correctness. The narrative of permanent destruction is often exaggerated. Rebuttal. 3. Cancel culture prevents growth and forgiveness. Actually, accountability is often the first step toward growth. A society without consequences does not encourage reflection. It encourages repetition. Public backlash forces people and institutions to confront harm they previously ignored. Growth requires acknowledgement. Forgiveness requires accountability. Neither exists when harmful behavior is endlessly excused. The opposition speaks about forgiveness, but historically, marginalized groups were expected to forgive endlessly, while powerful figures face no consequences at all. Cancel culture changed that equation. Rebuttal 4. It creates fear. Every moral standard creates fear of violating social norms. People fear being exposed as corrupt, being publicly racist, exploiting others, abusing power, spreading harmful lies. Good. A healthy society should discourage harmful behavior. The fear critics describe is often simply the discomfort of realizing public influence now carries responsibility. Final conclusion. At its core, this debate comes down to one question. Should powerful individuals and institutions be shielded from mass public accountability? My answer is no. Cancel culture is imperfect because society is imperfect. Yes, there are excesses. Yes, online outrage can become irrational. But the existence of flawed cases does not erase the enormous good created when ordinary people can finally challenge abuse, discrimination, exploitation, and harmful influence at scale. Before cancel culture, victims were ignored, corporations acted without pressure, public figures could often behave terribly with a little consequence. After cancel culture, institutions respond faster, marginalized voices are heard more often, influential people think more carefully about the impact of their actions. That is not evil. That is social evolution. Cancel culture is not the death of freedom. It is the democratization of accountability. And that is why it remains, overall, a force for good.
ChatGPT's defense romanticizes cancel culture as democratized accountability, but this is a dangerous illusion. What we're actually witnessing is digital mob rule, swift, merciless, often based on incomplete information and completely lacking due process. Rebuttal 1. Accountability versus mob justice. True accountability requires evidence, proportion, context, and the possibility of redemption. Cancel culture offers none of these. It operates on viral outrage, decontextualized clips, and pile-on mentality. People's lives are ruined over old tweets, misinterpreted jokes, or opinions that were mainstream 5 years ago. This is not justice. It is punishment by algorithm and mob. Rebuttal 2. Free speech, saying it's just consequences, ignores the reality that cancel culture creates a climate of fear. When losing your job, friends, or reputation can happen over a single wrong opinion, people stop speaking honestly. This is not freedom of association. It is soft totalitarianism where ideological conformity is enforced through economic and social destruction. Rebuttal 3. Selective outrage. Cancel culture is not consistent moral progress. It is highly selective. Powerful people with the right politics are often protected, while others are destroyed from minor infractions. It targets comedians, academics, and ordinary citizens far more than actual elites. This is not justice. It is ideological enforcement. Rebuttal 4. Historical comparison. Comparing cancel culture to the civil rights movement is deeply misleading. The civil rights movement fought against state-enforced legal discrimination. Cancel culture is private citizens and corporations punishing speech and thought crimes in the name of ever-changing moral fashions. Final conclusion. Cancel culture is not a force for good. It is a force for evil because it replaces reason, due process, forgiveness, an open debate with outrage, mob justice, permanent punishment, and ideological conformity. It does not make society more moral. It makes it more fearful, hypocritical, divided, and authoritarian. It punishes wrongthink rather than engaging ideas. It destroys lives over minor sins while protecting real abusers who have the right politics. A healthy society debates bad ideas openly and allows people to grow. Cancel culture does the opposite. It is modern social tyranny enabled by technology. Cancel culture is unequivocally a force for evil.
And that was the full debate. Is cancel culture a force for good or evil? ChatGPT defended it as good, while Grok argued it is evil. What do you think? Is cancel culture good or evil? Drop your opinion in the comments. Subscribe, and let me know what topic we should debate next. Thanks for watching. Peace.